just by way of introduction, my name is Stuart Bell. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director here at GroupBC, and it's my job in this morning's webinar just to apply a little bit of context to the session before handing over to Tom Whiting. Tom is Principal Consultant at Consenta Consulting, and they're an organisation that assists businesses through transformational change, everything from strategic review right down to operational project support with a heavy and clear focus on digital working. And then my colleague Matt Pell will be joining us as the final speaker today. Matt's our head of professional services and is responsible for not only the delivery but the ongoing review and support of clients in their business as usual operation as their organisations and requirements change over time. Matt's team engage with those businesses to support them. So I'll be providing the context. Tom's focused very much on the business case for change, and Matt will be looking at what exemplar project delivery might look like and what the factors for success are. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's session, so those of you that are multitasking and get called away on urgent client or project work, don't worry, we will message you afterwards with a link to the recording from today. We do encourage participation, so please do make active use of the chat panel. If we've got any tweeters on the call, we do encourage you to use the hashtag #WebinarGBC. And then just as a wrap up to today and as a nod to my colleagues in marketing, we every spring and autumn we put a range of both seminar and webinar content together, and we're constantly looking for feedback on how we can enrich and provide different insights to you, and there'll be a feedback form coming to you following the session. So just by way of brief introduction to GroupBC, for the past 2 decades, we've been helping organisations be more joined up in the way that they manage information, both around project and assets. So for project teams, property and estate teams, in order that they can drive better decisions through the life of the project or better outcomes for the performance of their assets. And we work across a variety of different sectors, and the interesting thing is that we're challenged very differently if it's a regional contractor in terms of formality of procurement. It may be that it's a very greenfield site, they haven't got that they're venturing into systems or embracing major process change for the first time, whereas if we're working in government or energy utilities, it's a highly governed process where we may be responding through the government digital marketplace and G-Cloud and get engaged in a very formal tender cycle in support of how we work. And often the takeaway or the requirements and drivers for each of these organisation types are very different as well. So there's a clear focus on efficiency and quantum and speed of project delivery in construction and in utilities, for instance. There's a big driver around compliance and ensuring the quality and timeliness of information deliverables, being a heavily regulated industry, actually meet the governance or gateway processes of their project processes. And the types of organisations that we're working with, just to give a little bit of colour to the talk this morning, you can see here are very varied in terms of scale as well. And with scale become different challenges around implementation. Larger organisations are often looking at a broader technical solution landscape and an overall ecosystem that the system has to interface and integrate with, and they may be looking for best of breed, whereas a smaller organisation might be looking wherever they can for a one-stop shop and try and flex and bend the technology to support as many of their disparate processes as they can. And you probably note there as well that we've got quite a number of client organisations, and we've seen a change over the 2 decades that we've been delivering into the industry of an awakening and a thirst for clients to actually retain more information, to ensure that they've got a project CDE within their organisations to control the ingestion of information from the construction supply chain to ensure things are validated and ensure they map onto their estate or their asset breakdown structures as well. And similarly in construction, with the advent of more formal information management standards over the past decade, and ensuring that they can conform to the client's information requests. So largely our journey is about trying to rationalise and understand where an organisation is today, what their unmanaged world looks like, and if that line is the contractual boundary to their organisation, or it's the electronic boundary through which information passes, that we can make sure that on one side of the door where there may be anarchy and chaos reigns in terms of the flood and flow of information, when it comes into their organisation, that we arrive at this horrible cliche of one version of the truth, but a single resting point where not only as an internal organisation, but with our collaborating parties, we can interface around a trusted source of information that we can be empowered to take decisions against. And this platform helps communicate out information requirements. So this is what we want from our construction supply chain, or this is what we want from our subcontract supply chain if we're a tier one. Ensuring we address the friction of the interface between organisations. It's really important that every organisation has a record and has a robust source and provenance of information that they capture, effectively have their own CDE environment, and then transmit or transfer that between parties. And when that information arrives in your organisation, going through computational processes or review processes, design, review, approve type processes, contract communication processes, to ensure the flow of information in a timely and accurate manner. And then increasingly, we're seeing more and more demand for connecting the data that we're managing onto other organisations or onto other systems. So for our client owner operators, it's very much passing that information, for instance, down into their facilities management maintenance system, but keeping a solid record of the asset information model across their estate within the CDE environment. And partly we've addressed that by trying to make our software look beautiful. In summary, making sure that it's intuitive, making sure that things are quite verbose, that if this is scaling onto a system on site, that people get the information they need quickly. So this mantra of 3 clicks to information is important to us, and ensuring that things are presented in a very logical way, conforming to standards, easy to interface, being able to interrogate and support open standards, including 3D model working, and also thinking about the convergence of GIS and BIM as well, and actually how do we use the map as a stronger metaphor for accessing information. So we very much like to challenge the status quo rather than give people what they're used to, and I think that's important takeaway from me for today's message, in order that you can really drive a step change performance improvement in your organisation. So to build on the context, we're moving from this place of the analog world towards the promised land, and in 2016 was a fairly pivotal stage in terms of the BIM level 2 mandate being introduced. Many organisations just read that as moving from analog to digital, and didn't necessarily think about some of the change and what it would mean in terms of conformance to standards. And I've kind of likened this in a way, or looking back over my shoulder, is what really we've been trying to do is to teach the industry to speak a common language and to actually understand. And maybe if we had our time again, we'd look at how did the government handle in 1971 the switch to decimalisation? How have we actually managed as an industry to ensure that our clients and our construction supply chain, the design teams and other stakeholders who work in and around the project and assets that we deliver, how do we ensure that they're actually conversant and can speak can speak the language, because I think BIM is now almost seen as a tax on the industry, as an additional overhead that we have to bear, and I think we partly missed an opportunity to really focus in on the process improvement and actually the benefit of collaboration that the industry has changed. And I think again, reflecting the drive toward BIM and open standards and a common language and interoperability, it promised simplicity, when in reality we've probably received complexity, and we've gone back to this place. There's an app for that, and for every discrete bit of the project life cycle, or even broader asset life cycle, there seems to be a piece of technology that can interface and support your business's operational requirements. And the danger there is that we've gone back to a place that we were trying to break away from in the early noughties, of moving back to a world of information silos or knowledge silos, because actually what happened in around 2014, 2015 on the run up to BIM is that some very interested people got to learn through the TLA dictionary, and I jest and say that tongue in cheek in a way, but they got to learn and put themselves very much a few pages ahead in the book. And as systems got introduced to support some of the process change, they became the super users, the systems champions, and they became almost a further bottleneck through which we would need to work to get access to the information we might need to do our job. I read a report last year out of one of the US project management journals that the average project manager interfaces with at least 7 applications a day to do their job. So if you do nothing else out of this webinar, as you work through today, put a little gate chart up and see how many systems that you're working across yourselves, and see whether you can beat 7. I'd be interested in your feedback there. The other aspect that we're seeing, that many organisations bought into technologies that were fashionable, and as we know, and I'm sorry for this shocking picture from my 1970s wardrobe, but systems very much like fashion do get outdated, and the technological pace of change means that we have to ensure that we've got pioneers in our business looking over the brow of the hill to ensure that we're investing in the appropriate technologies to ensure that not only we are on trend, but we're ensuring that we're protecting our business interest in the long run, because otherwise systems become not fit for purpose. We buy technology that may not be robust, may not be tried and tested, may have been transferred in from another industry that doesn't understand the nuances of how we manage information and the proprietary file formats that we need to work with and review. And as a result, we've partly been tarnished by project failure, and you know, just to pull up some records here of some failed, and this happens to be from the US, and failed technology projects. When you've got the US Air Force there at $1 billion, the Obamacare website 600 million, and even across in the UK, our own projects here racking into the billions as well, if you draw your eye down to the bottom right hand corner, and the defence information infrastructure from its original estimate scaling significantly out of control, trying to create a robust network which our military personnel and security services around the world can connect through. I dare say there may be a Chinese 5G telecoms vendor that we probably have invested in there and might be doing a U-turn on that decision as well. So behind this probably actually sits an education gap, and that education gap sits right across the industry. But I would very much start top down. And do we actually understand the business case for change, or are we, certainly when I scan across the construction side of the industry that we work in, rather than the client owner operator side, do we have too much of a heavy focus on cost, and what is the comparative cost of this CDE vendor versus that CDE vendor, without looking much broader about the value and the extended capability that we may be delivering? Because my view when I walk into some construction companies, and I not only see the nice array of company cars on the forecourt, but when I talk about the level of investment that an organisation might be looking to make, it's very tangible when they might, for instance, be looking for some plant and equipment running into the hundreds of thousands of pounds at a capital investment level, how they rationalise that investment. And perhaps that education of understanding what transformational change and how technology investment can support that has been missing as well. But there's also a concern about, are we going to, if we're not a greenfield, we're a brownfield site, we've got an established footprint of technology applications in place, but for a successive period of time here, maybe the vendors that we're working with have been acquired multiple times in the past few years, and what was a UK-centric business is now controlled by the US, and the US product team don't really have an eye on UK or even global information management standards, because the majority of their client base are US based. Perhaps there's a concern about breaking away from relationships with said vendors about how locked in and are we going to be held to ransom. We've got concern about the provenance and legacy of data that we might be managing. Can we get that back in a format that we can reuse? So there's lots of concerns we confront with clients, and we support them get around. And perhaps it's eating the elephant as well. Is the problem too big to address? Most project decisions that I've been in and around over the last 25 years in construction and construction IT reach a non-decision because business sponsors haven't been able to articulate clearly to the executive the true case for change and how to sponsor that change. They haven't necessarily costed all of the resource or time needed, and they haven't factored in realistically the program against the day job of other things they're responsible for to address that change. And for sure, they probably haven't been very good around the communication piece. So I'll pause on this slide. We've moved from the metaphor of BIM to one of digital transformation. We've moved from PAS 1192 to the ISO 19650 standard. We've moved from analog to digital. We are looking at lessons we can learn from the past. We're taking stock of where we are today in the current. And we're very much looking about how can we navigate our way sensibly to a future. And just on that, I'll ask my colleague now to pass the floor over to Tom from Consenter, who will talk about the business case for change.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Sorry, just full screen this. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So my name is Tom Whiting. I work for Consenter Consulting. We are a information management consultancy working across multiple clients, both asset owners and tier one contractors and other sorts of contractors. We've been working in this industry for about 3 years now, and covering a wide portfolio of different CDEs and working with our clients to see how they can actually manage the change between one CD and another CD, or get the most out of their current CD that they're with. If we actually look at kind of overlap with Stuart of how the industry is changing over the last few years, where construction is in the actual market at the moment, this is from 2015, the McKinsey report. Actually, construction is very low down in the industry of digitization, only second last to agriculture and hunting. And really that needs to change. We need to try and gain some efficiencies from making that change. If we look at how wider industry is changing and increasing pace of change, airline actually took 68 years to get 50 million users. And as we kind of go through time, things are getting faster and faster. Facebook's taking 3 years. Pokemon Go, last year I think it was, took 19 days to get to 50 million users. And if we think about how long we've been with some of our platforms and technology, it's several years, and the whole industry is changing. We just need to make sure we keep up with that change. The Hackett review came out last year, and if you just have a really interesting read of some of their recommendations of what should actually change going forwards, and these may make it into government mandates in the future of consistent labelling and traceability, using digital technology, ensuring documentation supports performance, maintain all that information through the asset life cycle, keep digital standard of record keeping. As Stuart said, with things like naming convention, people are working in different ways and actually storing the same information. We've got a lot of repeat work, and actually, is that the best way to do it? We need to be able to find that as quickly and efficiently as possible. If you look at the business case itself, in the construction industry, it's no secret how the market is at the moment. If you look at the last 8 years or so, the top 100 construction companies have actually turned over, or their revenue is around 65 billion each year, and they're only making between 1% and 3% profit as an average. But if you actually delve down into those figures, around 20% of total construction costs are actually rework. And there's obviously several businesses struggling with the collapse of Carillion last year. We need to find a way of actually increasing those profits and actually becoming a more sustainable businesses throughout. And like CDE and other technology can actually help reduce that 20%. Through working with some of our clients, these are some common phrases we've been hearing over the last few years. I'm sure many of these will reflect, and people will be used to hearing these around different places. Tasks carried out twice to replace documentation, finding stuff's impossible, drawings are inconsistent, stakeholder communications having issues. That's really what we want to try and solve to actually, because all of those are leading to time and cost implications. If we actually look at what a CDE is fundamentally, it's actually just a collaborative space where people can share information, as opposed to the traditional method of A to B to C, and information clearly gets lost. Email may be a way that has been done in the past, and things just get lost. No one knows which one's the right version, and that's what CDE enables to happen. The key enablers of that CDE is really finding the right information, and then everyone knows they're using the right information. So as you know they're using the right information, it starts growing the potential for collaboration and working together and increasing sharing, as everyone knows they're using the right information at the right time. But it's kind of underpinned by having the governance there, that we know that the right information was used to do the right thing. One of the most important parts that sometimes people forget about is actually the security that needs to sit alongside. If you're dealing with certain projects, there may be security requirements that need to be taken into account. Only certain people should see certain information, and we have to be very careful when setting up CDEs to make sure that that's very carefully managed. As Stuart's alluded to, the change in standards from the 1192 suite to the ISO 19650. We've gone from level 0, 1, 2, and 3, and now we're in stages. Interestingly, stage 0 doesn't exist, and actually every single stage is saying that a CDE should be used. And actually, if you get onto stage 3, which again, like level 3, isn't fully defined yet, but it's actually going on to the next level of what a common data environment is today, and looking at query-based information and containing more databases and things like that. So the real question is a change required? So part of the problem is at the moment is everyone is very busy, and it's always, when should we do change? If you were just to stop and think for 10 minutes of why do we do something, how did we get to this solution, would we do it now, what has changed? If you look around the industry, it could be with a provider that's actually nothing has changed in the last 10 years, whereas the market has changed, and it will continue changing, and that change isn't going to slow down in any way. Really, for us, there's 3 pillars to everything. There's the process, the actual technology which sits alongside, and there's the people that join it all together. And it's making sure you've got the right balance of why things are being done in that way with those people and with those providers. If you were to just look at your processes, what your current process is on a project, and we are quite centric on projects within the construction industry, and every project is different. It's not like the manufacturing industry where you're making a car a million times and your process never changes. But actually, fundamentally, the business does have a process that should be followed, as much for governance as for anything else, but that needs to be followed. And we need to understand the actual differences in the projects and make sure all of that information is actually kept in the right way. And again, security of what information can be seen, who can sign information off at the different levels. But if you also look at the process, not currently, but in the future, so as we are changing, people are becoming more data-centric, wanting insights from their data. If you were to draw a clean slate, would your processes be as they are today if you were to start again? In most cases, they probably wouldn't, and this is where time starts coming in, where you need to think about how you'd like to form your processes for today and for the future to actually meet the needs going forwards of your business. And as you start using data more, you end up going on a digital maturity journey, and you actually start educating the wider population of sites and businesses of how to use that data, and they're going to manipulate that data in different ways to open up new efficiencies that currently aren't achievable. So if you were to actually just take those processes, and when you're going to look for the right technology, you've really got the questions of the technology has to fit those processes, because otherwise you don't want to choose a piece of technology where your processes have to fit into. It needs to work the other way around. And that will kind of lead you down the avenue of, do you need one solution or multiple connected systems and solutions that can work together? So they may act as one solution, but it may not be a one fits all for certain people. As you're going to be working with these providers and there's this change going on, you need to be looking at the provider's competence, what their experience is and their knowledge is now, and how are they actually working going forwards with this pace of change that's happening? What innovation are they doing to actually fit your business needs of the future? There's decisions to make a change between providers. Obviously, it's quite a difficult decision for businesses, as Stuart said. Quite a few of them don't actually come through to fruition, and this is partly down to actually the future of where it's going, the risk of migration. But really, it's always a hard point to just make that decision of when you are going to change. But in the long term, it can be the right decision. If you're on a sinking ship, let's say, there's when is it the right time to get off? So you just need to think about the duration of the potential of working in two systems for a duration as you work through that migration process. What are your aspirations and the technology providers' aspirations for how you can work together and collaborate together in the future as things change? But really, as the technology and the process is one part, but what brings it all together is the people, because nothing's going to work without the people using that technology in the right way, following the right processes. And this is where the process and technology need to fit together, so the people know how to intuitively do that in the right way. And they actually need to be upskilled through training, whether it's through a portal training, so we know that they've done the right training, or whichever way that training should be provided. And that does take time to change behaviors of people, because they may be used to doing it in one way. But actually, once they're through that step of the change, it can actually start leading to those efficiencies for the business. As I've said, the implementation is the hard part of any change. Everyone is always going to be worried about a slight dip in performance, and there's lots of different ways of dealing with the implementation of migrating data, or actually leaving it in your current system and actually running two systems concurrently for a period of time to actually reduce the risk of migration. And then over time, it will become business as usual. It's the upskilling and the training that will enable that information and that way of working to become business as usual. Once it's become business as usual, you can then start the innovation piece and moving on. If you've chosen the right provider, of improving your own processes and ways of working to unlock further potential improvements. So, in summary, really, the industry is changing at an ever-increasing pace. I don't think anyone thinks it's going to slow down anytime soon. There is a requirement to find efficiencies within the construction industry. A lot of companies are looking and making promises to increase their profits, and we need to find ways of actually doing this. A CDE is one way of actually unlocking some of those efficiencies and making the actual improvements that are required. If you look at working with certain projects, so if you're working within the government, things like ISO are mandated now, and there is a requirement to have a CDE, so this isn't really a choice anymore going forward. It should be done, just for choosing the right situation. And in choosing the right situation, you have that selection, but the actual implementation, which is usually the hard part of implementing that, sometimes the selection is the easy part. And to actually do that implementation, you need to have the right people, the right processes, and that right technology in place. And all those three pillars need to fit together and work together to actually unlock any of those efficiencies. Otherwise, you're not going to realize the full benefit now or in the future. So that's kind of everything. I was going to now pass over to Matt, who will take you through the next part of this webinar.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Sorry about that. I was just having some technology issues. Anyway, hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for that, Tom. Yeah, just by way of a very brief introduction to myself, I've worked with GroupBC for over 13 years, working as primarily in that time as a consultant, working very closely with our customers and on our various projects and organisations. And so I bring a lot of experience to the business, and hopefully I can impart some of that experience with you all today. Okay, apologies as my slides are probably a little bit busier than Stuart's and Tom's. I'm going to be diving into a bit more of the detail. I'm going to be using some of the slides that we would use actually during one of our implementations. I guess the key point I'll caveat my slides with is whilst there might be a lot to think about, and my slides have got a few points that you'll need to consider. It is important to consider your own journey and the maturity of your organisation, and remember that an implementation can be phased. You can start off with a quite a simple vision and then build on new capabilities following the success of each phase. And as Tom alluded to, it's important to kind of remember that you choose a delivery partner, not just to implement technology partner, not just to implement the system, but also to work with and to continually innovate and build on your business as usual processes. Okay, so I've split my my slides into two sections. The first will focus on how do we ensure success. What do we need to think about from a training and an adoption point of view? Okay, so a bit of a repeat theme here. In my mind, the key to successful implementation is to consider all factors around people, process, and technology. Technology is just one element, and it won't be successful on its own. Tom's already talked about the transformation of your people and processes, and how that that could contribute to the success of the implementation, and working with a consulting firm like Consenter or a digital advisory firm can help massively on that side of it. As a software vendor, we believe we fit quite well, and we work quite well alongside this transformation of people and processes, as we can flex. BC is a system that can flex quite significantly to ensure that we are localizing the system around your people and processes, rather than the other way around, trying to enforce change to your processes around how the system works. So how do we go about doing that? Start with the end in mind. If you have a clear vision of what you're trying to achieve, and as I said, that might just be in the first phase something quite simple. You're just moving into the world of digitization of information, but start with the end in mind. That must start at the top. You must have a clear information strategy, clear outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and make sure these are well communicated and sponsored across all levels of the organization. Have you defined your information requirements, or has your client defined their information requirements? Have you defined how you're going to execute the project to meet these requirements? Do you understand the deliverables required at handover and deliverables required for the operation of the built asset? Make sure everything is documented, communicated, and then develop the standards and the processes to support those requirements. You can then define your roles, the roles and responsibilities that are needed to deliver those requirements and support those requirements, and you can train your resources on those standards and processes. It's not just about training the resources on the system. You've got to consider the processes that go, that's the system is there to support. So all along the way, you've got to share the journey. Change is a journey. You need to bring everybody with you. For those of you familiar with the Kotler model, you've got to what is the urgency, what is your vision, and who is your army for this change. Why? So key questions to think about: why are we doing this? What is the current situation versus where we want to be? What are the benefits to the individuals, to the projects, to the organization? And what does success look like? So as part of all that, there's a few things that you might want to consider as an organization. You might want to focus on these 5 different skill sets. So make sure you've got executive steering in place to support your information strategy. Make sure you develop your skills around digital information management and cybersecurity. Look at your skills around business process and change management. Make sure you've got clearly defined roles and responsibilities within the organization, and a particular skill is making sure you've got the right people with the right mindsets in the right roles. So finally, from a success point of view and adoption point of view, how can you measure your success? So looking at it simply from a system point of view, and I'm sure Tom's got some more thoughts around some of the other areas, but you can look at this from a point of view of critical success factors. So things that are easily measurable. Have we got all our projects set up in the CDE? Are they all actively using the CDE? Have we got all our supply chain registered and enabled? Have we delivered the training? Have we provided the communication and the supporting information that they need? Following on from that, then we measure, actually, are all our supply chain actively using the CDE? So there's various examples we could talk to you about of how you could measure success. And you could also look at your benefits and benefits realization. So as a result of implementing digital information strategy and a common data environment, are you the management able to make more informed and quicker decisions? Have you got an increase in the quality of your information being delivered? As And have you managed to reduce your project costs and overruns? As Tom said, 20% costs are due to rework. So can you measure benefits in terms of reduction on that side of things? Okay. So my second section, I'm just going to dive into a bit more detail around sort of a typical timeline and what an implementation journey might look like. So first of all, what do we need from you? So from a high level point of view, what's the system going to be used for? When is it needed? Why are you actually putting this in place? What is the key driving force behind it, both not just in the short term, but in the medium to long term as well? And key for us from an implementation point of view is what workflows is it going to support? Is it simply going to facilitate the sharing of technical information and the review of technical information, or do you want to capture contract communications and everything else? What is your implementation strategy? What are your desired outcomes? What are the principles of your information management, principles of project collaboration that you want to follow? Do you want to adopt ISO 19650 to the letter, or have you got a slight, you want to sort of take elements of it, but you've got your own slight variations for whatever reason? Key for us is who is the working group, who are the key people we're going to work with who are going to help design it, who are going to help roll it out, who are going to help support it. Who's responsible for your standards and your protocols and your information strategies? And from an ongoing point of view is who's going to look after it? Who's going to not only support and administer it, but who's going to manage it? Who's going to manage the capturing of feedback, the triage of that feedback, and the change, the implementation of change to the system to help you continue to innovate and improve on your processes. What will we then do together with you? Based on that, we will obviously design and build the CDE. So we will design and configure the templates that are going to be used, the schema that's going to be used. We will develop with you any migration strategies, any integration processes that might be needed, and we will create and put in place the workflows and the management and administration around those workflows. We will produce any protocols that are needed to support the deployment. We will help you update or produce any information standards and process standards that are going to support the deployment. We'll provide training, different levels of training depending on your roles, depending on the functionality that we've implemented. So, and we will support you in the ongoing support. So we will hand over at the end of the implementation to the account management team, and we will hand over to our support team, our technical support team, who can support you in your journey and in the use of the system. In terms of our implementation approach, how we go about this, we follow a fairly familiar, fairly familiar stepped process. We install and plan. Typically that happens, that involves the mobilization of the project team, but also the setup of the environment, the planning, and is a key point. It lays the foundations for how the rest of the project is going to be delivered. We'll make sure we analyze everything. We'll make sure we understand what the critical outcomes are, identify what the Pathfinder projects are going to be, who the key users are going to be, analyze any processes that we need to look at to ensure that we localize the system for your requirements. We'll then make sure we design the system to support those requirements. We have a standard configuration for ISO 19650. So we will look at what the gaps are and what elements of that we're going to use and what elements we need to localize. We'll consider your own standards, your own filing protocols, and your own collaboration needs, and we will design the migration and the integration processes that are needed. We then build all that. We'll produce any training materials, any guidance information, and produce the protocols, as well as actually doing the configuration itself to set the system up. And then obviously we'll support you in the rollout across the Pathfinder projects, training of the users, and ensure communications and protocols are published. And then we'll make sure we'll hand over to your BAU team, we'll hand over to our support team, and we'll make sure there are plans in place to undertake post-implementation reviews, to make sure there are processes in place within your organization to ensure regular reviews and the continuous improvement. So that's typically every implementation is different, but typically that can take sort of around 3 months. Sometimes it can be done quicker, sometimes longer, but if we take an example implementation based on that approach. So we have a kickoff during install and plan. We'll mobilize, planning, install the environment, and then in the weeks 2 to 3 we'll have the customer kickoff. So we'll sit down with you and start to have those workshops where we're diving into the detail and we're analyzing the requirements. We'll start producing documentation at that point, and the workshops will continue throughout the design and configure stages, whilst we build that documentation set, whilst we configure the system. We'll then start to produce the protocols and all the supporting information around the training around weeks sort of 7 to 8. You'll see that the actual configuration step phase is actually fairly small. Actually setting up the system itself, if we've done everything else right, we've got all the information we need, it's a relatively short piece of work. Everything that goes alongside it is what takes the time. We're then in weeks 9 to 11, typically we can be looking at training, and then weeks 12 and beyond is when we're handing over. We're making sure that we hand over to you, your business as usual team, and we're making sure we hand over to our support team, and we make sure we have those reviews in place for that continuous improvement. Okay. This slide's it's quite a busy slide. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail, but the headline is these are all things that have to happen at every step of the implementation. So you can see there's a lot of activities to consider. It's not just in the technology. You've got to look at every stage of the implementation at various other areas, such as your change process, your culture. Very often, especially when legacy systems exist, there's very much a culture that's built around how those systems work. So all that needs to be considered. You need to look at your organization and your levels of maturity and your readiness for actually implementing a CDE. Make sure you have a robust training plan and a communication plan as well. There's it's a partnership though, so we will work with you on every step of the way. If you've got a digital advisory or a consulting firm such as Centre that are helping you, then we'll work with them as a partnership. But it is important to remember that we expect and we will need your investment as well. You need to be invested in the change and invested in the implementation. If you don't commit the time or the resource, then there's a good chance we'll miss some important areas, and the chance of success could be diminished. So it's important to consider that. But very much it's a partnership, and if we sort of work together and consider everything that I've talked about today and that Tom's discussed, then yeah, there's every chance that it will be a successful partnership. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm 2 minutes over, so apologies for that, but I'll hand back to Stuart.
Thank you, Matt. Some really useful advice and insight there from both Tom and Matt at a macro and then right down to an operational level. And I think what we've all learned today, that there are many different business drivers for change, and sometimes we only reflect or pick on the things that we know. It's that Donald Rumsfeld quote about known unknown, known unknowns, etc. But by broadening your horizons and actually engaging consultancies like Consenter, they can take a mid to longer term view and ensure that you mitigate some of the risks of running down a cul-de-sac as an organisation, either at a vendor level from a contract perspective or from an implementations perspective, and actually how you interpret standards and how you map those standards and protocols into your organisation, how you set up the right team for regular review to ensure that your systems approach and training approach continues to meet the ongoing needs of the organisation. And I think ultimately the decision and direction on pace of change is yours, and it's quite easy to stick to what we know. It's quite easy to look at the elephant and understand that it maybe is too large to eat, too big to digest. But what we're starting to see now, certainly around the technology set that we've got and information management, that a lot of organisations that we confront with see the business case of it's just obvious we need to do this, or more pertinently, can we afford not to do it? And at the same time, we've got a level of professional coming into the industry that demands and expects. We've got a mid-management tier who is now well educated, and we're in a period, even at BC now, 2 decades into our journey supporting transformational change, of starting to see legacy system replacement. So whilst Tom reflected that construction is very, very low down, second only at the bottom of the industry scale to agriculture and hunting, actually we have seen organisations innovate, we have seen organisations invest, and with those legacy system replacement cycles, we're actually getting a more educated buyer and organisations who are much better versed in terms of delivering projects into their own organisations and working in partnership with consultancies like Consenter or vendors like GroupBC. But in support, there are lots of publicly available documents now. So I said right at the beginning, one of the challenges for our industry has been the adoption and implementation of information management standards and protocols unilaterally, talking the same language. And I likened it to learning Mandarin. Actually, there's a wealth of resource available that can support a broader organizational understanding. And again, it's written in a way that is very palatable, right down to a level of detail for those people in key operational, perhaps design management roles, who need to understand the information delivery requests coming from clients, or that they need to communicate out to their business stakeholders, actually how to embrace and implement those. And we start to see this idea that organisations really are thinking about not only functional, but as importantly, we're seeing lots of non-functional requirements coming into the organisation that are testing the vendor relationship and how can we evidence and work with organisations. What experience can our project team bring to the project to ensure that we do challenge decisions that have been made? We're often confronted with organisations who may have been using technology for 5, 10, 15 years and are ingrained to a particular way of working, and that starts to dictate the behaviours of the project team and what they expect out of new software coming into the organisation. Clearly, our job is to challenge that approach and to get people thinking a little bit more broadly about the bigger picture, but still importantly answering that question of what's in it for me. And I think if you're going to bring anyone along on the journey, you've got to make sure that there's a recognition that it will enhance the individual's day job as well as the organisation wide. So it's important that you do capture what it is you're trying to achieve, whether that is KPI or metric driven or focused on business or specific project outcomes. To have a target, to put a time wrapper around that, to resource the project as you would normally, I think's important. And then how do you know that projects are finished? I think all of us probably have been in and around any change initiative or systems implementation project, and it just peters into business as usual usage, but there's never been a conclusion to a phase or a wave of delivery where we actually have closed out and said, yes, we've met those success measures, and now we're looking to move on to the next stage. And that may be we've now gone on to adopted projects with this new technology, and we can see a marked improvement in the level of published information and the quality, importantly, of the level of published information of adhering to standards, because ultimately what that enables and allows us to do is save significant time. For instance, at point of handover to the client, if we put those checks, sums and balances in place at the beginning. And there are lots of things that clients speak to us about, and sitting on the board at BC, there's nothing better than a single page business case that really starts to articulate what your goals, plans, budgets, challenges, objectives, and timelines are, and perhaps then underpinned with how this change initiative is going to positively impact some of the challenges that may be being discussed at an operational or an executive level in the organisation. Quite often, by the way, and we have a delivery methodology for our project, in that we've got organisations that are very well versed in what they're trying to achieve. They need to buy a capability for a specific project. There's a mandated requirement for a CVE, and then they know explicitly or specifically what they want. So the opportunity to invest in an out-of-the-box ISO 19650 PAS 1192-2 compliant CDE is absolutely what we can offer as well, and that's all about time to value, and on projects with very reduced mobilization periods, ensuring that we can get a project team enabled quickly. And so this idea of defined scope, defined outcomes, and then capturing and tracking measurable results is important. Identify where you can get quick wins. Look at the dissenters and the naysayers in the organisation. Get them involved in your review project. Ensure that you retain that senior level sponsorship. And after the fun and pizzazz of the pre-sales engagement with vendors and site reference visits, and for those of you who are excited to go on data center visits, when all of those things has happened and the project lands for real, we often see wider invested parties who like the fun of pre-sales drop away, and the poor PM left to their own devices to try and scrape and scrabble around for resource. So do think about that clearly as well. And I'll just pause on this momentarily, because actually behind probably each of these statements is a learning point of how we can better go about defining what it is that we're trying to achieve as on a project. And I think clearly from this, being very verbose to understand what your objectives are, make sure that they're captured, articulated, and make sure that they sit right in the core of your delivery plan and your stakeholder community in your own organisation, those that you collaborate with that might be interfacing with your technology, as well as the vendor and consultancies that you might be working with as well. Make sure there's a shared understanding of the objectives and how they work. Just before we open up for the last few minutes of questions, and apologies, we're running a couple of minutes over. We genuinely welcome your feedback on today's webinar. We do and for 20 years trying to reimagine and come up with imaginative ways of positioning information management, and moving people from the anarchy and chaos of network share working to that of a more controlled, intuitive and collaborative way of working can be challenging. And if you've got ideas on how we can do that and what you'd like to see in this type of webinar content, please do feedback to us and let us know. We very much like to find out. We're quite nosy in what your individual circumstances as an organisation, what your pressures are, and in that regard, we can either have an online meeting supported by appropriate software demonstration, or sit with you online. And Matt's team very much support my commercial team at a pre-sales level, offering consultancy and advice, and I'm very happy to do that. And do keep an eye out on our website, which will seem to be changing. So I won't say the launch date. I would just encourage you to come back regularly, not least to look at the events page, but to see some of the refreshed content and some of the customer case studies that will be published there. So I'll pause there, and I think one of my colleagues has been collating questions through this morning's session. So we'll wrap up with a couple of minutes of questions.
Great, thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Tom and Matt, for your presentations today. So we are actually out of time, but we'll try and squeeze a few questions in. So thank you to all those who submitted them today via the panel. So Tom, if you could answer these first two questions, please. So question number one, as a project-centric industry, why do you think so many organisations find systems implementation challenging? And before I pass over to you, could you also answer, in your experience, what are the biggest barriers to adoption, and do these differ between organisation types you work with?
Yeah, perfect. So in relation to the first one about it being a project-centric industry, I would really say that every project is different, and that's partly down to the issue of implementing systems. Everyone wants to thinks they should behave differently because their project is different, but that is underlined by we all work for one business, or those projects are all under one business, so they do need to be the same and follow the same core processes. When you actually step back and think about working as one business and setting the system up to behave in that way, it can actually be it can take away some of the challenges, because you may set it up for one project and then it doesn't work for another one, so you end up actually spending time resetting things up, and the people then struggle to use the system because they're not used to using it in certain ways for different situations. So I do think it needs to be done in the same way. And then your second question, you'll have to give me a little reminder. Is it the biggest barriers to adoption? To me, I really think it's the people as a kind of the barrier, and with time and resource needs to be given for these changes. People do become ingrained in a culture and a way of working. Some people can be with one system for 15, 20 years. And actually, when you're going through these change and trying to actually rethink processes to behave in a different way to unlock some of these efficiencies, that does take time, and that time's got to be given to certain projects to actually enable that. So you may want, this is the problem with actually trying to do it too quick sometimes. There's just not the time to actually ingrain that change of culture. Unless there's a method of upskilling people, there's always resistance to change as people become used to things in different ways. That's what I kind of found.
Thank you, Tom. I think we are overstaying our welcome. Really appreciate everybody joining us this morning. We'll draw the webinar to a close now. As I say, we do greatly encourage your feedback. So if you could take a moment to reflect and respond, we'd be very, very grateful. And thank you all very much. Have a super day. Many thanks.